So I'm very, very privileged to introduce the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize winner, who will be the last presenter at our conference. Well, the reason I feel so special about it is that I come from the country where Nobel brothers actually made their fortune, and this allowed them establish the Nobel Prize eventually. This is a historical fact. So Jerry White is the CEO of Global Impact Strategies Incorporated and the executive co-chair of Global Covenant Partners. He's known for leading high-impact campaigns, including the historic international campaign to ban landmines, which was a co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. He co-founded Survivor Corps, formerly Landmine Survival Network, the first international organization created by and for survivors to help victims of war rebuild their lives.
Great. Well, welcome, Jerry. We're glad to have you. And I've got to tell you a quick personal anecdote before we get started on this, because Jerry and I are going to do kind of an interview here. In my last executive MBA class that I taught at the University of Michigan, Jerry was one of my students. And, you know, it is a little bit daunting to think of, I'm going to teach ethics to a Nobel Peace Prize winner. What the heck am I supposed to tell him? You know? So that was a little daunting there. But then I moved to Washington, D.C., and it turned out that Jerry lived 2 blocks away from me, our houses in Silver Spring, Maryland. And so we ended up becoming friends after that. So it's been a nice, long relationship, and I'm delighted to have him here. So, Jerry, let me start. We've got some questions that I wanted to get your reaction to. You worked at the State Department, and you have a new business that I want to talk to you about in a little bit. But you shared in the Nobel Peace Prize for your work to eradicate landmines. Then you went on to negotiate the UN Convention of the Rights for Persons with Disabilities. Now you're working at the University of Virginia to explore ways in which religions can advance peace building. It seems to me that this background requires both organizational skills and also dealing with the ineffable, the hard to put your hands around. And that strikes me as having similarities with both business and music. So I was wondering if you can briefly share with us what you did with the Landmine Project and how that might relate to music.
Well, thanks so much, all of you, and I apologize that I couldn't be there in person as well as listen in all day. I've been distracted by the dissonance of politics and the lack of harmony in Washington and our democracy days. The frenetic crescendo of political. So just be glad you've been talking about music all day and not having the news. I also want to thank you, Tim, again, for the friendship and all I've learned from you. You're the first executive or MBA business school professor who would actually sing in one of the classes. I thought, wow, you actually have a voice. You don't want me to sing, and you actually don't want me to talk about music too much because you'll expose all of my weaknesses of just learning piano for 10 years and then dropping it and actually being an appreciator of music, but also knowing my limits. So I'm daunted by what you're trying to do, but I'm so enthused because I have been trying to play in my mind, what is it about music that actually enhances social impact around the world on some of the biggest issues of our day? So to think of it sort of, quasi-theoretically or just posit some ideas for you. So the different campaigns actually, it's important for me to start out to say that I think when you're going after strategic impact for anything, and peace is in that category, then in fact you're in the, it's the art of creating of power to affect systemic change. So already we're in the category of creativity and art when we're dealing with social impact or systemic change and strategies. So that's an important point. So I thought in all of the campaigns, including the one we start with here, the landmine campaign, what was it about that campaign? And I thought about why we were able to be successful. Part of it was, I think the music that would align most with that campaign would be jazz, that there was all sorts of improvisation and breaking of the rules to create this campaign. And early on, I thought, well, what is it about organizing 1,200 organizations in over 120 countries, with a call to action to ban anti-personnel mines and help the victims? And then what is it about a Princess of Wales who shows up in the second act of this drama and actually has a virtuoso voice and actually starts to riff on her own in ways that we didn't see coming, but the audience was quite pleased with? And then what is it about how do you resolve that? Suddenly in the second act, or beginning of the third act, the princess is dead. This is 20 years ago, and we're going to negotiate a treaty to ban landmines. And also, how does it resolve? How is it that in the third act you can break, after having break-in rules, you can move towards resolution? So this idea of art and music, on one hand, I think you could look at campaigns themselves and class them differently, and the ICBL, for different reasons, I think is closer to the jazz metaphor. Similarly, there's the question of alignment in a campaign like the landmine campaign. I've come to realize that you have to align wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, or 3 levels, and know which part you're talking about. When you're talking about wisdom, that would be like iconic anthems, as our previous speaker was talking about. Anthems can tap into the value set and the principles that are transcendent for various groups involved. There's some sort of unifying vision and wisdom involved in that category of iconic music. I'd add a question and a footnote to that of, in these days, most social campaigns, including peace and conflict, are having less impact by entering from the left, I might posit, through folk songs or we shall overcome, or something that trigger people on the right thinking, oh, this is another lefty cause. So in the work on landmines I did in Israel, there was no way that you could come in through the left or Shalom Achshav or Peace Now, or try to evoke some of that sort of earlier iconographic anthem. You had to come in from the right. So question is, what is music from the right? And then what is coalescing or iconic music that could give an umbrella? And the second is just music as understanding. For every conference we did in the landmine campaign, whether in Mozambique or in Cambodia, Bosnia, Colombia, music was always involved. So it's a coalescer during conflict that brings people together. And they also have to understand the orchestration of the different musicians and players and pieces of any systems changing campaign. So music and dance and local ownership, manifesting the cultural ownership in each of the venues, was really important for the internationals as well as the locals. So music is used is understood as a coalition building effort. And in every major event that was staged and music was involved. And then thirdly, there's music as sort of knowledge or action, just a tool of excellence that could be dealing with survivors who needed to understand like resilience, and music is a way of overcoming trauma in many cases. Or it could be just a fundraiser, and you might recall after years later, Paul McCartney got involved. I remember sitting there in an event that we were doing. It was honoring the landmine campaign, and there was like Paul McCartney in a duet with Brian Wilson singing like Let It Be or Imagine or any of like trading off on their songs. So it was the element of surprise, not just music as business as usual, but music as excellently done, surprising, and for effect on the audience. So if it's a fundraiser, it might be you need a good song somewhere in there. You need entertainment. And so, but that's not as iconic as, the wisdom category. It means music is a tool of excellence that people want to hear. And is it hitting your audience and doing what you wanted to achieve at that sort of action-based level? So I just sort of posit there are different ways of thinking about campaigns as music to be deconstructed and theorized on that. And then there's how music is used in a campaign at more than one level. Are you muted, Tim?
Great. I was just saying that was great, and some of the things that you were talking about, Jerry, were things that we've hit upon earlier today, like local ownership and jazz, and some of the other things. Oh, you're now not hidden anymore. This is great. Now we can actually see you. And also some of the things you just said were new. Music from the right and surprise. I think that those are both interesting things to think about. Let me go to another one of your campaigns, and that was your disability rights campaign, and ask you to what extent that you think that music and business help to advance those causes.
Then I would add the element of pacing and crescendo and momentum. So in the disability rights campaign, you have 1 billion people around the world who are largely invisible to the human rights framework. And they had been plodding away in the fields of rights, whether for the Blind Federation or the Deaf Union or the different types of disabilities who had their organizations. I call them, any campaign has like a disability mafia or sort of a mafia that they need to be honored, but they haven't been effective. But it's been decades where they've been working on their special rights. In our case, we realized that disability rights was not at the table with the global field of human rights. They didn't even know the song lyrics for human rights. They knew about charity, medical models, social, sort of rights, and this denial of their opportunities and discrimination, but not the fulsome picture of how human rights had evolved and budded over the years. So in that case, you had to recast the disability crowd with learning the human rights harmony sheets, train them on how to do techniques of negotiation at the UN, and say, no, aren't you worthy? I mean, disability affects all of us around the planet. Aren't we all worthy to have a seat at this table? So the thematic became, the chant of nothing about us without us. When does a slogan become an anthem, even if it doesn't have songs to it? So we got that far, and then you realize, damn, this is really hard work. We're not doing jazz outside the UN Convention Hall, where we negotiated the first draft of the Landmine Treaty and took it outside conventional constructs. We were well inside the conventional constructs of UN human rights negotiation, which meant this is going to be a long slog. It's going to take all of these governments buying in early. And it was hard work. We did a lot of work. And I thought, this is, it's a serious issue, and it needs fun. It needs some surprise. And like landmines, some of the dark and dismal issues from cluster munitions landmines require music to lighten up a bit. In this case, the issues of human rights and disability were also quite, and poverty and exclusion were quite sad. So in this case, there wasn't an anthem that emerged. I mean, some people might, say we shall overcome, but there was no nothing about us without us slogan song. So we took over the UN General Assembly Hall, and even during a time post 9/11 of high security, we introduced the element of surprise. This is almost halfway or 2/3 of the way into the campaign when it felt like a slog. And we needed momentum. We needed sex appeal. Like Diana brought that to the landmine campaign with an immediate, like the injection of celebrity and beauty and icon status, that a princess cared about maimed people and would show up in their, their backyards. So in this case, we surprised by casting Lou Reed and the Blind Boys of Alabama performing together for the first time, as well as other people like percussionist Blind and Deaf from Jordan. And now, so you mixed it up to surprise people, delight, and also you think there are people who are deaf signing the whole thing and opening and moving chairs so the seeing eye dogs and people with mobility disabilities and also wheelchairs could move around and dance and celebrate in the UN General Assembly Hall this call to action. So in that case, we had other music, but it needed a center point pulling together, coalescing musical moment. But the campaign itself was more like an old-fashioned musical. It had ensemble casts, it had some crowd pleasers, it had like decent harmony, and we had known players. So it wasn't as sort of exotic as jazz, but you had to know what type of music were we playing here in this campaign. And even so, it needed some rock and roll. Lou Reed had to come in and, of all things, sing a song with the Blind Boys of Alabama on Jesus. All of this was counterintuitive and shocking people, but people just went and then the things picked up, and Kofi Annan in the Secretary General's office started to pay attention. This was jazzy and rock and roll brought into a rather serious issue like disability. And it had its way and its beginning, its middle and end, but campaigns that do not have momentum, crescendo, and I dare say harmonic, musical, creative sex appeal will die a slow death by just plodding onwards and never actually making progress.
So I know all of you are sitting here listening to Jerry and listening to all these musical metaphors and rhetoric that he is throwing in here, and you think he planned this for a long time. I can tell you, he talks like this. I mean, this is a cup of coffee with Jerry, is that he has this ability to just interweave all of this stuff that's particularly pertinent to the conversation that you're in. So this is extemporaneous in a lot of ways.
This is the genuine
It's the genuine thing here, right here. So I know we're exploring ideas, but you've led social impact campaigns, obviously. We're sitting here in Bloomington right now trying to imagine what we might do with music, business, and peace. And we've had about 1,000 ideas get thrown off the walls here today that is both daunting, confusing, and inspiring all at the same time. So I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are, the big challenges and the opportunities that we might be facing in trying to kick off this kind of a program that we're doing right now.
I think it's so perfect. That's why I'm happy to help in any way I can add some value, however limited. So again, you ask me a question, I'm an Irishman and have Blarney, and I have thoughts on these things that are sort of limited, but they are born from experience. They just have no footnotes, which Indiana and you all and scholars must bring to this table. I may put forth a little, jingle, but in fact, it needs footnoting and research and say, how are we tying, what conversation are we having here? So I think having an academic initiative and leading edge from also the DNA of Indiana, where music, is known for its music school, and that so you're trying to build on that. So with people like yourself, with ethics, peace, business, and music, you're coalescing. Already I can smell something important happening energetically in your backyard and on campus. When I see that the DNA of the wisdom of that and the talents of the university and the need in the world are coalescing or aligning, then I find it rather interesting. And I think it is so important what you're doing. People don't have this missing piece of why music, why harmony. Even in the at UVA, where I'm leading this global initiative on religion, politics, and conflict, it's interesting how few people understand the music of religion. And that campaign has to be more operatic. You're dealing with icons like Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Moses and Muhammad and Jesus and all of the above. They have to be evoked. And the liturgies and the canons and the chants and the great classical music, much more like opera. But in fact, it's not understand. For me to talk this way at UVA or with the political sci department, it's like I'm crazy. In a sense, like it's not, this doesn't, it's, that's nice. Could you then come down a bit, from your rarefied air? So this idea of actually structuring the conversation that you're trying to do on any campaign, but in particularly my life has been on this peace building and conflict zone. I try to get away from it, but in fact, I'm thrown back into these plot lines to try to produce some type of harmony and change. So I think what you're doing is critical and coalescing and true to your campus. Therefore, it has a strong success of being showing leadership in the world and having some impact.
One last question, then I'll open up for some Q&A. So I know that you have a business now that you are doing, a new technology platform that uses advanced decision analytics to help advance peace and security. And so I'm wondering how this business approach might provide some benefit or thinking about the topics that we're talking about today.
I guess there are two answers. One is just, and again, I'm not a math matters. Piano is sort of a perfect math instrument. We've got to understand linguistics types and like the qualitative experience of music made into a quantitative platform to sort of game out. So my company is about an advanced decision analytics company that over years learned how to take qualitative insight, translate it into like a math algorithm that shows high accuracy predictions on some of the toughest issues of our day where there is not good information. So this is not a big data company. It's when you have mystery, enigma, insufficient or hard to capture data, how do you use models that are sort of in a sense musical to predict what's going to happen? And if you want different scenarios of strategy, creatively, how would you change the tunes, the assumption, and fine-tune the strategies to have the impact that you want? So on one hand, there's something about math, music, and models that are important to explore on the business front. On the second front, it's an emerging area to understand that what is music? It engages us, we participate in it, but it's also entertaining, right? So what if you watch the trend line of Jeff Skoll developing this year, launching the Social Entertainment Impact Center at UCLA, then it's not quite music, but it's analogous, I think. The business of social entertainment, social impact entertainment, whether participant media publishing The Inconvenient Truth to all of the wonderful movies that have won more awards from Spotlight and others, issue-oriented art brought to the people, a huge audience, but now trying to ask, what are the metrics to measure social impact entertainment? So our company has been asked by Skoll's people and the director of the center to start to model out what that looks like. What are the indices, the notes, the frequencies, the factors that in fact impact, and how does it vary for an environmental issue or a nuclear issue or an economic issue, whatever it might be. So watching some of these, moving your lens out a bit to say music is actually so comprehensive that you can fit almost anything into it, just like democracy. And it's like there's so much there, but in fact understanding, if they're doing that from a entertainment point of view, how can we start to measure that trend and align the audience's needs and their love for entertainment, good music, as well as like good film. If that's not there, it's not going to reach anyone. What's the channel through which you're going to try to reach that audience? Film, documentaries, social media, even attaching social campaigns. And what's the message, the call to action? Are you clear about what the lyric sheet is or the lead sheet for the jazz? There are things about just producing and aligning wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, audience channel and message, as well as other things that I think are about harmonizing, not finding unison. I cannot stand actually peace movements, because this approach for harmony as unison, as agreement, ends up being a disaster and creates actually more conflict. We are in conflict movements. Music should move you to drama and dissonance and then resolution. So in fact, as my son, who's studying at the Berklee School of Music, so we do have one kid who sort of knows the drill, I said, Bo, what's the most dissonant, if companies were going to resolve this, but also music and like Indiana, I told him I was going to be talking to you guys, and he was proud of me, even though he laughed that I would have nothing to say. He said, Dad, there's these, I've been experimenting with these chords on the piano. They're the 3 most ugly notes together that you can possibly pull together. And he showed me 3 or some chords, and they just sound awful when you play them together. And of course, as they say, it's screaming for resolution, but they're the most dissonant, the most violent of the chords. And he says, Dad, music is not one note, i.e. unison. One note is not music, it's just a note. And 2 notes, an interval, fine, that's still not music. You have to build on the chord. I'm giving you 3 things to start to build on or think about resolution. So I asked him, how do you resolve those 3 awful sounding notes? And he goes, well, there's a couple ways to do it. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 steps to get the resolution. But he showed me, I went down to the piano and he said, or you can actually, with everyone taking a half step, a distinct half step in some direction, and creating actually in the chord a bigger space for the distinct notes to play out, you reach the harmony. It was just, again, a teeny little son-father metaphor, but I thought, this is so interesting that I want to think about it more. So I put it on your table because I don't know what it means. I think it for the global covenant, for Abrahamic, triadic, where Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are scapegoating and massacring each other at levels that are very unfortunate and hearkening back to the past. How does one resolve dissonance and conflict where it's screeching out at you in the Middle East and North Africa, where religion-related violence is the fastest growing in the world? How is it that music, opera, and classical and structured principles can combine in this big challenge ahead? So I don't know if that's all about business, but there's plenty of work to be done for sure.
Right.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. That was great. Do we have time for a couple of questions?
Yes. Do you want to unmute your mic?
Am I?
No.
Can you hear me?
A question.
Yes.
Now we can.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for the, first of all, just thank you. This is really inspiring, and I've learned so much. I'm a student at IU. I play French horn, but I'm a business minor, so I also get to see inside Kelley, and it's really interesting, the two schools of thought there. But I was wondering, since you were talking about your son, is there something that young people do really well that we can all learn from, or is there something that we need to bring to the table that we're not doing to change the world?
I think now that I'm teaching at UVA, and these kids are my 4 kids who are 20, 22, 24, 26, so it's right in this ripe demographic, probably your age. And I'm thinking, I so want them to, not that I'm not going to live long, but I'm getting older, and you're passing the baton. And these students, I get so I was like, you must get it. They all raised their hand, all 60 of them on the first day of class, saying they want to be difference makers and change makers. They want to make a difference in the world. They want to be driven. So I'm loving this resurrection of idealism that I saw missing sort of in the 90s and a little bit. So I'm seeing in my children, but also on grounds at UVA, this shift. You should not be cynical. You cannot make music if you're cynic, and you can't speak to the world without. So this idealism is important. It's not just romantic. It's interesting and important in the play. Youth, The same thing I'm trying to think about, like when they go for rebel music or Metallica or down, and as old-fashioned parents, you're like, I don't know, all that dissonance, I'm not sure I like it. But the mixture, the diversity and the eclectic nature, I have not, my children, let alone ones I'm meeting, all seem to be drawing from Bob Dylan and folk and jazz, and they love Hamilton, the musical, and they love, so this range, also very important. Like you love the French horn, but that's not your only thing. It's the French horn in the context of music and history and wanting to make a difference in the world. How does one do it? I think it's very important to not just cast youth in the play, to invite them to start playing their instruments, fine-tuning their skill, and contributing to this like collective impact. And that means you have to play your instrument the best with purpose. Just being a technical like musician means nothing. I can paint watercolors and be like boring and try to sell them on like some, tourist site. When is art really art? When does it go beyond your skill because you're speaking something bigger than yourself, something universal? When you're tapping into the world and these energies, that's when you start to pop. You know that when you groove in your music, when your skill suddenly pops and you're like, I think I just created music. You were playing it all along, but it didn't transcend to the category of art. That's the same thing with campaigns. I feel it and I know it. This is a question of social art. And if youth aren't cast in it, even watching Prince Harry, who I got to meet a couple of weeks ago in London, taking on the unfinished business of his mother's work on landmines and other things, and Prince William as well. This is absolutely critical. This can't just, we have to mix up the scholarship that we have in the room and in your connections, the youth that have to take up their instruments, and the big opera play where there's something that's bigger than all of us here. We're just doing our jobs. I can do mine, which is like speak crap at you and pretend it's music. But it's really an invitation for everyone to take up their instrument.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Like we've said throughout, each one of these conversations could go on for about 5 hours, and I know Jerry has other things to do. But is there one other question maybe that we can
Well, I was just struck by the idea that it can't be just everybody doing the same thing and harmony, but it's all these things existing together. And that's something I learned in studying music in West Africa, that the longer a piece goes on, the more successful it is, the more people come in with variations. Each person does a variation, and they all have to be working, sometimes in tension with one another.
Right.
But that, to me, that was such an interesting metaphor, because it wasn't this idea that we're all singing on a unison, or we're all singing on the resolving to the tonic note, but there are these things coexisting, and that's what people found most interesting.
Right. And I love that. Also, when you see the cutting edge musical form change, I mean, I love musicals, and sometimes they're cliche, from No No Nanette or The Music Man, but now when you're seeing, Book of Mormon or Hamilton and many others, these are still just blockbusters. They're playing with the form, they're spoofing the form, they're reinventing forms within the form and the casting. That's the edge. So you don't, as you guys are moving towards next year, the coming year of things that you want to do to sort of have, build crescendo for next spring, we don't want to beat it over the head with like taking the cliches and metaphors of music to say, here's our percussion panel, and here's our choral panel, and here's our variations on the theme panel. It's all true. Those things have to mix in. So it is a creative effort for you all to sort of try to plot out the different roles of the orchestra leaders, plus the composers, plus the lyricists, plus the venue and the staging of it all. So I don't want to create one big cliche for you, because there's so much on the table here. Just asking me to talk to you started my engines going, because I was almost like I had a metaphor to organize. In fact, I thought, I don't know anything about waltzes, but I'm supposed to write a book on strategy, the art of strategy. And I was like, everything, I'm like, they're triplets in almost everything I see, and there's a waltz. In fact, my whole thing is going to pretend it's like a music metaphor of the waltz for strategy on some big event of our day. It might not work, but you've inspired me.
That sounds like you need to write an opera.
A faux opera. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jerry. That was inspiring, which I expected it to be. And thanks for your time. I know you're really crushed on time right now, so thanks for spending
Thank you. I'm so grateful to you all. We'll keep in touch. Thank you all for the hard work today. I appreciate it.